Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount from your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to have a deeper dive into two really interesting cards from our Shrouded Fable expansion. I didn't really give enough time towards the Dusclops and Dusknoir in my first impressions video that was just yesterday. Now there's two possibilities here. The first of which is that I breezed over these cards, didn't really think about all the potential synergies that we had in formats, and I didn't give them their due credit, or I breezed past these cards so I could make this video that I'd already prepped. I'll let you guys be the judge of that one, of which is true. But regardless, today I'm going to spend a bit more time talking about the really interesting Stage 1 Dusclops and Stage 2 Dusknoir. They both have the Cursed Bomb ability, which says that once during a turn, you may knock this Pokemon out, and then the Dusclops places 5 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, while the Dusknoir, the harder one to get into play, places 13 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And what I think is really interesting about these two cards coming out from the set is that, as we know, our format has a lot of synergies for allowing the opponent to be ahead on prize cards for you then to take advantage. So let's just quickly look back at some previous cards that have actually been banned in the expanded format that can do similar things. It turns out that feeding your opponent prize cards to make sure that you're dictating a prize map, or just enabling yourself to have these very powerful comeback cards, can actually be somewhat of an upside. I think undoubtedly Mismagius has been the strongest version of this, because not only are we giving the opponent prize cards, but of course it was also a draw engine. It allows us to create lots of combos all in like a 1 or 2 turn time span to then completely flip a board state once the opponent has been forced to take those prize cards. However, it's also the case that Island Challenge Amulet and Milotic have also been put on the ban list in Expanded. It's definitely worth noting that in Expanded there are way more selling point cards, and in fact in a lot of cases these cards would create turn 1 handlock situations, and also all the handlock cards got expanded as well. So they kind of just dealt with the cause and effect really by banning all these cards in one go. It's not necessarily the case that the Island Challenge Amulet was way too strong or anything like that. It's just that the card pool was so large and expanded that there were these combos that could slip through the cracks. So not every one of these cards that have had this like self-KO effect has been powerful, but I did just want to sort of highlight the fact that there is precedent for these cards to be strong because we already have a number of them in the expanded ban list. Not that expanded is even a format, let's be honest. Just to really highlight the strength of this Magius, I did just want to show off a top 16 list from Igor Costa back in the LAIC 2019-20 season, where the Mismagius was the entire build around for the archetype, so that we were able to trigger some really crucial effects. When you had more prize cards remaining than your opponent, you could start your turn with a Surge and then play 2 supporters that turn. Also, when the opponent was at 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, Beastring, some incredible item energy acceleration, was unlocked, so we could access much faster damaging options with Naganadel Guzzlord, which was a powerful tag team Ultra Beast. And that final one, of course, Reset Stamp, trying to put the opponent down to that low hand size early on in the game to potentially brick them whilst you're also attacking and pressurizing the opponent. I thought it was worth looking back at a deck list like this because there are certainly elements that you can start looking at in our standard formats where we have Reset Stamp, we have some supporter cards that can certainly take advantage of that. Where there's B-String, there's cards like Counter Catcher, which are powerful item cards we could unlock. So even though this is a completely different strategy to what a Dusclops and Dusknoir could achieve, there's still those same selling points that you can throw into your deck to completely pivot a board state immediately by giving your opponent these prize cards. Let's have a look at some of our best comeback cards in the format then. Iono and Roxanne both seem like really, really powerful options, where we can just try and put our opponent down to that low hand size. It would take quite the combo to knock out enough Dusclops straight away to be able to activate Roxanne, but it is possible. And even putting your opponent down to like a 4-card hand from Iono seems very disruptive, especially in early game situations before the opponent has been able to thin the deck of lots of their Pokemon and all that other stuff. Countercatcher really is that creme de la creme item card. We've seen how often now that Dragapults, Charizard, Gardevoir players, they're maining 2 copies in all of their lists, and that's before we have the gift of throwing prizes at the opponent so we can make sure we have this effect live for longer periods of the game. So adding to the damage counter upside that we can gain from knocking out our Dusclops or Dusknoir, we're also activating an insane item card. And then just a couple others to bear in mind. The reversal energy could allow us to access even more attacking threats, and that Defiance Band could be another way to ramp our damage damage output as well, which is also featuring heavily already in Dragapult and Charizard lists. Speaking of which, these are the main cards that I think could take full advantage of the Dusclops and Dusknoir damage counter placement in particular. Gardevoir already has Fluttermane with its Hex Hurl that can place damage counters, and Monkey Dory that can place counters on your opponent's Pokemon as well. Because the 5 damage counters from Dusclops very rarely allows you to trade 1-for-1 on an opponent's Pokemon on board, you're probably going to need some help via these attacks or these abilities to actually allow you to have that 1-for-1 trade-off. But the upside is that you're just losing a silly Dusknoir, whereas you're targeting some really important Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field. Some of the main ones to think about is if you can knock out an active Pokemon whilst also knocking out their evolving basic on the bench, allowing you to effectively board lock your opponent from certain attackers. If, for example, you're able to knock out the only Charizard EX in play whilst also knocking out their Charmander thanks to the combination of Dusclops and Fluttermane or Monkey Dory or whatever else, you are then buying a essentially free turn from your opponents with no response attacker. And I think that's really the thing that I undersold about the Dusclops and Dusknoir, is that these are actually like board control cards in many situations, where similar to having like a spread damage attack, you can target multiple Pokemon in one turn and completely flip a board state. As we know, Charizard EX has one of the best sort of checkmate style attacks in the game with that Burning Darkness that gets stronger and stronger as the game progresses and your opponent takes more prize cards. By incorporating this Dusclops, straight away that Burning Darkness becomes way more dangerous. Even if the opponent hasn't taken any prize cards, we could ramp to KO some basic EXs much easier. If a V-Star has just taken 1 prize against us, we could place those 5 counters with Dusclops onto their active, and then suddenly Burning Darkness will deal to 40 damage because we'll be feeding them a second prize card, and now we can reach V-Stars with no issue. And of course, there's just way more applications. This could allow us to set up a Burning Darkness later down the line as well on bench Pokemon, whilst also just knocking into active Pokemon that have lower hit points, or if we're setting up a 2-shot and looking for a late game Burning Darkness 1-hit KO, similar to how we saw Tord actually incorporate a thin Dragapult package to his Charizard Pidgeot deck, so that Phantom Dive as an attack could achieve a very similar outcome. Speaking of Dragapult, simply because its attack places 6 damage counters means we could be super flexible once again with the 5 that we are already placing with Dusclops. So not only will Dragapult EX attacking decks do well, but also by proxy, Regidrago V-Star could be stealing that Phantom Dive attack, and once again just have even more flexibility and board control over the opponent. There's even just mild synergistic cards you could think about, like Iron Valiant EX and Horlucha, which could tick that 5 damage counters into much more dangerous ranges to take KOs on evolving and setup style Pokemon. I've mostly been talking about Dusclops rather than Dusknoir, but certainly you can also just play like a 1-1-1 line, for example, and have this option of just having this threat that sits on board, knowing that your opponent probably wants to deal with it in fear of that potential Dusknoir coming into play, because you know that 13 damage counters is a much bigger swing in games. At that point, you're dealing with Radiant Greninja, you're dealing with Bibarel, and without any other prep damage, you can 1-for-1 into evolving and even stage 1 evolution lines. So realistically, I think a 1-1 Dusclops package changes a number of matchups and makes your opponent play their board so differently, but that threat of Dusknoir is also very real to consider. I very quickly just wanted to show some deck lists as well to show that sort of proof of concept that you can fit this package into decks quite routinely. This is a slightly adapted build of a very recent successful Gardevoir EX list, where we have the double Fluttermane and Monkey Dory to try and complement the Cursed Bomb from a 1-1 Dusclops line. Naturally, of course, we have 3 copies of Iono, 2 Counter Catcher, and so many ways we can capitalize on those 5 damage counters from Cursed Bomb. I really like its combination with Fluttermane, so now the Hex Hurl effectively does a 70 damage snipe, whilst also dealing 90 to the active. And as we know, Adrenabrain is so flexible right now. Even though it is just a 1-1 package, we do have Super Rod for potential reload if you want to, but I really think that this is going to be like a swing card that you only use once a game, but it can just tear apart certain board states if the opponent hasn't prepared appropriately. Also wanted to give a shout out to Daichi, who is a world's 2nd place finisher in London 2022 and has a YouTube channel of over 100,000 subscribers. I'll link in the description below if you don't check out his stuff. Even though I can't understand a word, I still get so much out of his video and his insights, and this is his most recent list of Charizard Pidgeot that incorporates a 1-1-1 line of that Dusknoir. Interestingly, it's also choosing to play the new Fezandipiti EX instead of having a Bibarel package, possibly to try and make space for that Dusknoir in the first place. Again, there's the highlights of that high count of Iono, 2 Counter Catcher, and even Defiance Band in this 60. So using that Dusclops as a means of ramping definitely seems to make a lot of sense here. Additionally, however, having the Dusk Noir as an actual option within the list as another rare candy target or just a slow evolve option allows Charizard to play that Iono late game strategy much more reliably, even into decks that are preparing with Bibarel or Radiant Greninja. And then just one more list that I wanted to go over. This is really going very heavy combo in that situation, similar to the Naga Guzz list that we just saw from Igor Costa. This list was originally sent to me by a buddy, Luke Kirkham, but of course the original list is from a Japanese player, where the idea with this very heavy Dusclops line, as well as a 2-2 line of the Forretress EX, another Pokemon which can self-KO, but also provides the Regidrago with an acceleration option, especially with the Hyper Aroma A-Spec within the 60, you can give your opponent a ton of prize cards, throw a Roxanne or Iono at them, and then you're trying to utilize the Dragapult EX attack, combined with the damage counters that you're trying to place all over different Pokemon, or possibly you can double down on Dusclops, knocking out even a Manaphy, and then you can even utilize the Kyurem attack, which is 110 to 3 different Pokemon. There's no doubt that in some evolving matchups, your opponent's board can be entirely wiped by a sort of turn 2 combo pop-off from a strategy like this. Even though I think this is more of a gimmicky style approach, it does just show how far you can push a card like this to completely take advantage of board state rather than actually a prize race, and in doing so, take complete control of a game. So there we go, there's my apology to Dusclops and Dustoir for not giving them enough credit. I feel like these are terrifying cards coming out from the new expansion, which already combine nicely with some of our best Stage 2 Pokemon that we have in the game, and are going to create some really complex board-style puzzles that you have to keep in mind as soon as you see your opponent bench a Duskull. Thanks so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed my more in-detail approach to the Shrouded Fable cards. I might also be doing this to just highlight some of the most interesting cards from the set, because we have a long time before the World Championships. I can go into much more detail about every harebrained scheme, every wacky combination, everything that I'm musing over for the World Championships, with plenty of time left over to get more serious as we get closer to the event. Regardless, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.